So it's kind of weird because I just got back from Zion not too long ago, as we talked about in the last episode. And we're recording this on a Friday. And on Monday, I'm heading back there again.
Really?
Which is kind of a unusual thing. Technically, that's not the destination, but I'll be passing through it, and especially on the way back. It's interesting because I've been seeing, so right at this point in time as we're recording this, Andrew Barufu, who's been on this podcast before, we've talked about him, he's in Zion right now. And so I've been watching his stories, and it's really interesting to see how the fall color in the main canyon, which usually would be very much peaking by now, it's still pretty green there.
Okay.
But the reason I'm heading out in that direction is that a photographer friend of mine, Marty Quinn, he lives in Arizona, and I usually see him each year in Zion, but he had applied for a permit to hike into North Coyote Buttes, right on the Arizona-Utah border, which is where there's a pretty famous place called The Wave. And it's a place that lots of people... There's like this lottery system in order to get a permit to go there. And people literally come from all around the world because they want to hike to this place. But there's very limited numbers of people that they let in there because there's a lot of fragile sandstone they don't want to get destroyed. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's hard to get a permit to go there makes people want to go there even more because, it's just, human nature and the way that it works out. But he ended up getting a permit to go there. And I think it's for... him and 3 other people. And so a while back, this was back before my fall trip. I don't know if it was back in maybe September or something like that. He asked me if I was interested in doing that hike. It's going to be in mid-November. And I'm thinking like, this is not long after I get back from Zion, and then I'm going to be heading out there again. But, it's a really good opportunity. And I've been there 3 times before. And with probably the first 2 times, the main purpose was photography. Now it's just kind of like, I just kind of want to revisit the place and just to see it again with different eyes now. It's not like I have cyborg eyes because that would be cool.
It would. It would solve a lot of my problems in terms of like contacts and glasses and all of that. But
yeah. But I think it'll be interesting to revisit a place because I think the last time I was there was in 2011. And so just to see how I see it now with everything that I've learned through the years and just spend some time exploring, hanging with friends. All 4 of us that are going, they're all large format people. So I think it'll just be kind of a fun thing. And also there's this slot canyon that's accessed from the same trailhead to get to the Wave. So it's in Buckskin Gulch. And so Buckskin Gulch, that's where I shot what I consider to be my first portfolio photo. It's this sagebrush up against like this sandstone wall and reflected light. And I shot that back in 2009. So while I'm there, it might be fun to go back and revisit that and see how it looks after all this time. But I will say, it's really weird to be just getting settled back home again, working through all my images from Zion, working on the zine, but also knowing, oh man, I gotta get packed and head back there again. But also there is one photo that I'm bummed about in Zion where it's a little underexposed. It's a photo I shot toward the end of the trip, and it's one that doesn't rely on fall color at all. And I'm thinking I can probably go back and just reshoot that. So I think I'll stop through Zion on the way back and do that. I got to figure out a plan as far as where I'll stay and all that. But it's weird. It's really weird to be heading back there. And I think it'll be surreal to be out there again, both in the Wave, but also inside. But that's what I got coming up. What about you? What's new with you? What's going on?
Can't say there's much of anything new.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have any plans for really the rest of the year in terms of trips. I don't have anything major work related or photography related. Kind of just...
Well, I mean, you got a lot on your plate at the moment as far as, getting settled in with everything.
Yeah. But like in terms of like plans and nothing new. I don't know. This past weekend, I went up to the cabin, spent the quiet weekend up there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So did a little bit of photography, some more like abstract, man-made kind of things.
Yeah.
And then this morning I went, and Emmy and I went over to the local park, and for the first time in a while, we just spent 2 hours in this afternoon, or early afternoon, I should say, and walked around and photographed here and there of just one subject.
Kind of more of like a wooded park kind of place?
Yep. Local woodland. Yeah. So,
I didn't know if you're just like, swing set and,
No, I avoid those because normally more people are there.
Creeper, walking around. Here's my dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, there's not much going on. I will say this morning, I don't know, was it still morning? I mean, we got there at like 11. Came back at the house by like 1, so kind of midday, whatever. When we were over in the woods, there's one scene that I've been trying to get a photograph of for a while, and it requires a lot of focus stacking or just changing the composition, like trying to figure out what the best composition is for it. It's another one for my Memento Mori series, and there's a fallen log in the foreground that's lined with mushrooms. And then on the ground then is a bone. And especially now with the fall leaves and everything falling on top of it, it adds another dimension to it. Prior to that, there were just like raspberry bush leaves that were around it, which is pretty nice. But I've been trying for the past few months to get a photograph of this particular scene because I really like the sort of dichotomy between the mushrooms, like all of the death that's in this scene, really. The mushrooms, the fallen log, the bone itself, and then this time, today, the fallen leaves, but previously the life that was also present there of the raspberry bushes. The problem with it is that because there's so much depth to the scene, it's really tough to focus stack and to make it look right. So a lot of the problems that I was having was that everything would focus stack fine, but there were like halos, like soft vignetted halos around the mushrooms.
Yeah, there's weird stuff that can happen with that.
Yeah. So I got it to a point where it's okay. It's not super noticeable, but I still don't like that. Like even at an 8x10, I can point it out. If you go any bigger than that, just like 16x20 or even 11x14, it's not going to look the best. And it bothers me too much.
Is it a scene where if you were working with large format, you could make it work with the movements and just call it a day?
I don't think so. So today when I went out, I decided to photograph it in a slightly different way because of how everything had changed. I hadn't been to this particular spot for about 2 months, almost 3 months now, I want to say. So I was even surprised that the bone was still there. Most of the time, these bones just mysteriously disappear. I don't know exactly what happens or what goes on in this little wooded section. Part of me doesn't want to know, considering all the bones that I found there. But so I was kind of surprised to see that it was still there. So I was playing around with it, and there were still these mushrooms lining the fallen tree. And this time I decided to go at a slightly different, from a slightly different vantage point. And instead of having the tree follow on a rightward diagonal through the frame, with the bone in the top left in terms of like a vertical orientation.
Yeah.
I decided to have the tree go from a downward left to right angle. with the bone in the top right segment, again, vertical.
Yeah.
And this meant that instead of having multiple mushrooms, I just had the one mushroom and the tree took up a smaller portion of the frame.
Yeah.
So I played with that a little bit and I did a focus stack of it. And then I also was using the tilt shift adapter and I wanted to play with that.
Yeah.
And that seemed to work. But I still needed a focus stack, even using it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's because there are essentially two planes of focus that I'm trying to reach here, even with with using a lot of tilt. So I was able to get the entire background in focus with the bone and the leaves. And then I had to focus or refocus, and I was able to get the mushroom and the tree trunk in focus. So I think if I can stack those two together, it'll be easier than trying to stack every single frame from regular focus stacking. That's why I don't think even with large format it would have worked. I mean, I was already stopped down to f/22, so maybe at like f/45, f/64, and given the size difference of the sensor or the film, then things would have been different with it, but I'm not positive.
I will say that hearing about all the thought process that goes into photographing a scene like that with the digital setup and, you know, using a combination of some of the tilt along with some of the stacking and all that, it really makes me appreciate just working with the film. Because like there's so many, like, yes, you can do stuff like that with film, but the amount of mental gymnastics one must go through, it's just not worth it unless it's like a really, really important shot. Like I've done that once and it worked out well. But I'm just so happy. I just love the fact of getting it as good as I can in camera and saying, hey, I did the best I could, and accepting any sort of imperfection that goes with it. I
think the main difference, though, that we really have to consider here is the type of subject matter that you and I photograph.
Yeah. I also like dead trees and stuff. So,
yeah. You know. But a lot of the stuff that I'm photographing here is very close to the ground and more complex, I almost want to say, than a lot of the stuff that you typically photograph.
Yeah, and I usually look for pretty simple subjects, usually single plane, stuff like that. It's a little easier to work with.
Exactly. So even with large format, like there were a lot of times where I was just letting things go, like you said, just the limitations of large format being what they were. And there were times where I had to let a scene go entirely that I wasn't able to photograph because there was no way I was going to try focus stacking with large format. I know you've done it, but...
I've done it. It's a pain.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
It has to be. It still has to be for a very controlled situation, but it makes even more work after the fact, I think, than digital.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I just love having just that nice, satisfying click and like, cool.
Yeah,
I'm good. There's just something nice about that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I still get that, and I know that 9 out of 10 of the photographs. 9 out of 10 times, I'm still achieving that, like a simple click without much like faffing about. But it's just when I knew going into this scene, it was more complex than what I typically am after. But I also think that there's something nice about that complexity because it was a scene where I could come up to it. I knew roughly what I wanted. I knew sort of how to get there. And having in my mind focus on the steps necessary to take that were necessary to take to get that scene as I wanted it, to get that photograph as I wanted it to be. It just put you into a sort of flow state because of that challenge that's there. So yeah, I definitely love the times where I can just walk up to a scene and real simple, but there's definitely something to be said about pushing the limits of what you can do with the gear that you have.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot to be said about that. Also, another thing for me that I've been working on since we last recorded a week ago, I had just gotten my film back from the lab. I was just starting to scan it. I was just getting familiar with things. And I had mentioned how I was going to split the trip in half, use, the first half for this print portfolio and zine, the second half for next year. I was trying to figure out where to draw that line.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it was fairly easy to do. So I selected basically the first 4 good photos. 3 of those will be print portfolio material. The other one will be included in the zine as well. And then beyond that, there's another 5 photos that 4 or 5 of them could pretty easily be in the print portfolio, and certainly all those could be in the zine. Making the decisions was a fair amount easier than I thought it would be, as far as figuring out where to draw that line. But since doing that, I've been the same technique that I've discussed in the past, where I have all those photos, all the new work, just open in Photoshop, just in tabs. I just flip through them, look at them, do little tweaks, go to the next one. And then at some point, once I'm pretty happy with them, then I'll start flipping through not just the first, the second, the third, but I'll do like the first and then like the third and then the fifth. That way, when I'm looking at the photos, the one I'm looking at before it isn't always the same image. And something about editing them based on a group, based on a set, just really helps to, I think, keep one grounded. But eventually I was happy with all the edits. Some of them were a little trickier than others, but I did test prints for all of them. And based on those test prints, that's when I chose which ones would be in the print portfolios. And there's 3 images from the fall trip that I need to complete this year's print portfolio. And I've produced the first 2 of those images. And then probably when I get back from the next little trip over to Zine and the Wave and all that, I'll produce a 3rd one. And then I also laid out the zine. I just need to do the handwritten portion for those. And I was just tweaking the design a little bit based on that. So that's come along pretty well. I think when I get back from the trip, I'll send that off to be produced. Things are moving along pretty smoothly. It's better than last year, because last year I didn't really know what to expect as far as the zine, as far as the, how things would look in the final printed thing. So I have a bit more knowledge now. There's a lot more cut and paste, which makes things a lot easier. But I think that at this point, it's less stressful than it's been in years past, but probably also just because, if I had such a huge body of work and I had to choose only a few images, then it would be a little bit more difficult. But since I'm actually splitting it, it makes it less work, because I don't feel the pressure of, which of my pets do I like better than my other pets? Which one's my favorite?
Yeah.
Which, I actually do have answers. There's a solid number 1, 2, and 3, but
there always is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think this upcoming trip, this unexpected or somewhat unexpected trip,
exactly,
how do you think that's going to affect how you proceed with the print portfolios? Is that going to be something that's included if you take any photographs in the next year's print portfolio then, because of that split?
It could certainly be a possibility, but it's nice to go into it with no expectations. Like, I'm not, I'm certainly not bringing in a video camera.
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing very minimal stuff. If I get a photo I really like, that's cool. But I think this one's a bit more just kind of for play. It's not really, there's no pressure behind it whatsoever. And I think from that standpoint, and also knowing it's going to be a quick trip, it's just going to be there a couple days and back. It's kind of nice, because if I get some stuff I really like, I could certainly throw it in the zine for next year. It could certainly go towards the print portfolio. But I think going into it with no expectations from a photography standpoint, and simply from just revisiting subjects from the past, and just taking the time to enjoy it. I don't even know if I'm going to bring any film in a box. I think I'm just going to preload a certain number of film holders, and that's will be far more than I'll need. So just keeping it very, very simple in that regard. But also just having the flexibility of if I get something I like, hey, there's an ability to use it, but just no expectations, which is kind of nice. I haven't had a trip like that in a while, which is pretty good.
Yeah, that's like all of my trips, but also totally different mindset around them. But
yeah,
it's always good to go on a trip when you don't have like anything that you're hoping for, anything specific that your mind is wrapped up in.
Yeah.
So a little bit more creative freedom.
Exactly. And initially I was thinking like, do I even really want to bring my camera? But I'm like, yeah, if I'm going that far, I should. If anything, it'll just make the hike a little bit better of a workout, having a little more on my back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll bring it, but just keep the expectations low, and who knows? I mean, I think it gives a lot more ability to just explore and to just have fun, which is something that I haven't had a trip like that in quite a while. But I know that once I get there, I'll be in the mindset of like, oh, this is great. What time of day is this going to look good? Okay, let's figure this out. Let's, there's a subject over there. We'll do this one first and that one. So, to get into that flow state. Mm-hmm. So I think that'll certainly be something that happens.
Trying to think if there's anything else that's been going on. Things have been so quiet on my end. Like quiet but hectic at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Well, I will say that before going on the fall trip, I'm always looking to find like a way of organizing things the best that I can. And I've been wanting, I like to bring my bike along on the various trips. And it's always tough to manage because I never want to, leave it on the hitch mounted carrier because, someone could just steal it. And I can have it on the inside, but it gets a little bit tricky. But there was a moment before the fall trip, which was quite nice, where I found that I can actually fit the bike inside the cargo carrier on the roof, which doesn't sound like all that big of a deal, but it was one of those key pieces that just made life on that trip so much easier.
Yeah.
But it's also something that had me planning a little bit in terms of at some point later down the road, whatever vehicle I end up getting, knowing that I don't have to try to fit the bike inside my car anymore to sleep in the back. I can just have it stored safely up on the roof. That's been something that has been fairly nice. Just I don't know. It's just one of those little things that you learn along the way that just makes life easier. Just always trying, and I guess the point of it is just that always trying to find a way to refine your process and figure out the best, most efficient way of doing things. It can be good. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but it was something before the fall trip where I'm like, it was incredibly satisfying just having the bike fit in there by like, a fraction of an inch. Yeah. So I don't know.
just filling time.
Yeah. Exactly. But I know I'm pretty brain dead today. I did go for a ride, before this, and Oliver's barking in the background.
I hear him.
Yeah. must be time for the mail delivery. That sounds like something different. Yeah.
I don't know. My brain's, like I said, I'm in the same boat. This week has been rough. Like I've not been sleeping well, and then going to the gym 4 times a week instead of my 3. I'm still getting used to that schedule. On top of that, going outside on a walk with Emmy, really is taking me out of it. But I don't know. I keep telling myself too, I need to work on revamping my website, giving it a little facelift, and publishing some of the work from Yellowstone, from Acadia, even from the Palouse. I don't think I've really published anything that I've photographed this year. Like, there's very little.
Do you think you're slower? Because I know in the past you would have all this film that wasn't even developed yet, and then some of it was quite old by the time you got to develop it. Do you think you're slower now compared to then, or do you think that was slower? Like, I'm curious if you noticed any changes in that sense.
I don't know exactly what it is. I don't think I'm obviously faster with editing. Like, most of the stuff that I have, like from the Palouse and earlier this year, throughout this year, it's edited. It's sitting in Lightroom waiting. Some of them have titles, some of them don't, and titles are my biggest hang up lately.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
But so I can't say that I'm any faster or slower with it. There's just some kind of, I don't know, mental hang up. Perhaps it's just a questioning of why bother to release anything, you know? Because it's not like I'm making any sort of income off of my own photography. The income that I make from it is from my writing and from primarily through the magazine. So it's one of those questions of not so much like why bother photographing at all, because obviously I still enjoy doing it. I love the process and the expression that I'm able to accomplish with it. But more so, like, I think I've mentioned it before, and whether through here, but definitely in private conversations, I've always gone back and forth on like this desire to disappear, you know? And like
Homer Simpson in The Hedge.
Yeah, kind of. More like Everett Ruiz. He was the 20-some-year-old poet and writer who disappeared in the backcountry of Utah. And his body has not been found and never will be found. This is back in the 1920s. Just walked out into the desert and was camping and just never returned. But it's this idea that I keep it going back to in a very cyclical nature of who I currently am versus who I want to be. And this desire to disappear really falls into that of, now that I have a day job, I'm doing some behind the scenes work in terms of the magazine where none of my stuff is really forward facing by much. And I like that. I like not having much, like not having all eyes on me. It fits my personality well. But I'm still split where I'm like, I don't know how to proceed, you know? And clearly I'm thinking through this as I'm talking, so you'll have to excuse all of the pauses and such that I probably won't edit out because I'm lazy. And that's a lot of work. But it's just that questioning of, do I put in the work, put in the time and effort to really try and push my photography, my writing, etc. out there, whether it be for the sake of it or for some sort of potential monetary gain? Or do I just do this kind of stuff because it's what I enjoy and maybe publish some things here and there online, but not make a big deal out of it and just kind of stay in the background, you know? And I go like back and forth on this, and that desire to disappear kind of fits in with it of, I've had thoughts before of just completely abandoning any online presence that I have and whatever, like it doesn't matter because I'm still doing these things for my own enjoyment, from the intrinsic value that I gain from them. And this also goes right like hand in hand with the website idea I talked about a couple months ago and have been slowly maybe working on a little bit with Manuel, of just a very minimalist website where maybe it's just a place where you go and you can read my essays and you'll see a photograph here or two throughout the essays, but otherwise that's just what I do and have a very minimal presence. I don't know. It's, like I said, it's really just that question that keeps going on in my head of, I know who I want to be, but who I am doesn't align with that. And getting to that point is difficult. Like, it's a lot of work and it's confusing to figure out what kind of path you want to follow in order to get there. And
in your case, obviously, and this applies to, I think, most people that are photographers, you know, once you get in that flow state and are creating work, you're not necessarily thinking of how will this be used? When will this be released? Anything like that. It's just, you're just in that flow state. It's just something that you're doing. I think since you are also a writer, and when it comes to the work that you produce, from a photography standpoint, it almost makes sense to not necessarily, share all the stuff right away. And it makes sense to sit on it maybe a month or two or a year later, looking back over that work. Then you start, drawing, correlation between certain images, and that brings up something from a writing standpoint, or you're writing something and you need an image to go with it. And then it leads you into some different direction from a writing standpoint. So I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily that you don't necessarily have that desire to put stuff out there, because it really is just kind of banking that work for whatever project. It could be something later down the line. You're like, hey, I have enough work for whatever this project is, So I think there's something to be said about just in that gathering work sort of phase. And I think another thing too, go ahead.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there too, that me being both a photographer and a writer. And I think that's causing a lot of unnecessary confliction in my head of feeling as though I have to pick one versus the other, not necessarily as I have to give one of them up, but more so which one, if either, do I want to have more as my presence, online presence. And if it's writing, then do I even bother with a true photography website, of photography portfolio, or do I just integrate, like you were saying, my photographs into my writing as they fit, as is necessary, and then just build off a presence more on my writing. And if down the line I publish a book, then integrate my photographs within the book and within the writing itself too. Trying to figure that out is a huge thing.
And I think whatever it is that you produce that integrates the, writing and the images, I think in its final presentation, it will look extremely purposeful to the point where a person will look at it like, how did they even think to, combine those things? But it's all about, having that process, whatever that may be, that leads you to that point. And so I that's why I think it's good to, to have that work in the background, to work from. And also when it comes to, having an online presence, I think, and this probably is a little bit more towards social media than like a website, but I guess it can kind of go either way. There's this feeling, I think, with a lot of people that if you just post an image on Instagram and then just kind of like shut off your phone or whatever and just kind of ignore it, that like, oh, you're being like antisocial, you have to like interact with everyone. It's like, not necessarily. I don't think people necessarily view it that way. If something just is posted there and, you're not necessarily following up with everything, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it's more of a sign that like you're not, you don't have to constantly consume, you could just post and run and just have it as just a way of putting stuff out there. But in your case, I don't know that would be necessarily beneficial. I do like the idea of just having that work, stewing on it for a while, seeing what comes from it, drawing those connections after the fact. And I think in the end, it will create something that seems extremely purposeful. It's like, how did this genius create this? How did they even think of all this?
Yeah.
And in reality, I think in most cases, when you see something like that, the person had a process and it was just one step at a time. But in the end, it's something that seems like it would be very intimidating to create just from scratch, because you don't really know what that process is that person was doing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So all of this is on my mind as I debate my website and, like I said, about revamping it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes it very tough because, like I said, I know there are two different ways that I could see revamping it. one of which being very minimal, very writing is like my articles and everything are forward facing and that's it. Or the other one is more going full bore when it comes to photography and education in that route, offering workshops and portfolio reviews and prints and various other things of that manner. And there's no clear answer in sight. And this is something that I've been mulling over for a solid year, if not more. And it's just, it puts up major roadblocks in terms of, well, what do I want to do? And like, especially with my writing, I know I have so many different article ideas. I've always been good with coming up with different ideas for what to write about. And we've talked before about what I've considered as being potentially my like magnum opus of writing about death and the various essay ideas that I have around that and the thoughts that I have around that. But at the same time, it is like getting to that point, and this is causing that major roadblock. But I don't know. Something to talk about in therapy more than on creative banter. But
yeah,
I don't know. Anyway,
you'll figure it out.
Eventually.
Yeah.
So,
figure it's probably time for our artist of the week.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this week is Antonio Carter. He is a large format photographer. Though I've been trying to think back to how long I've run into him in Zion. I think 2021, maybe 2020, somewhere in that range. So he's also a musician, but when it comes to the photography side of things, works in large format, and really, really beautiful set of work. On Instagram, he's Antonio Carter Photography, and his website is antoniocarterphotography.com. Works with a lot of small scenes, which is really fun. I don't know. It's so cool to see other photographers in the same areas where I go to and see what they come away with, because oftentimes it's scenes that I've literally walked past. There's one that he shot this year, which was it's the first one on his Instagram. So it's these mud ripples with some raindrops and some fallen leaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice.
And he had mentioned, I saw him in the wash, and he had mentioned that, he found an area with some pristine mud ripples. And then as I was walking the other way, eventually I found the area where he had photographed that. And sure enough, there's literally footprints like just outside the frame. So he found this one little small area, and there's a photo I took back in, I think it was 2016, of a kind of a similar scene with the similar sort of mud ripples with the raindrops in it, which is something that is not very common to come by especially during the fall. And so he made very good use of that. And there's another one, I guess it's the second row down in the middle, some rocks with some fallen maple leaves on them. And I know where that scene is, but I never thought to photograph it. But I look at this, I'm like, oh man, that's a really cool photo. So he's got some really, really nice work. And the other thing too is when he posts stuff, he really doesn't do much processing on the images at all. He keeps it very faithful to the original film, which is kind of cool. I have a tendency to tweak things to bring it back to reality if the film got it wrong, or to tweak something if it's not quite what I had as far as a vision of the scene. But there's something kind of cool about keeping it fairly true to the scene. So he's got some really beautiful work.
Yeah, he does. I'm just looking on his website as well. But before I get to that, there's one on his Instagram while I'm on it. The fourth one down, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the fourth one down in the middle, almost like a heart-shaped rock.
Yeah.
Cut out of a rock. That one's really nice too.
Yeah, that's one where I know exactly where that scene is. And it just, the year that he photographed, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. Oh, it says 2022. So the year that he photographed it, it was just, the conditions were so great because sometimes the washes get messy and there's just tons of sand everywhere, but there's just a good balance of sand and rocks and a little bit of leaves in there. So he did very well with that scene. I think anytime you have a heart shape, it makes for a pretty cool subject.
Yeah, it does. And I'm looking on his website under his intimate landscapes gallery, and he has another version of that scene that must have been taken a little bit later on in the year based on the leaf debris that's around it.
Oh yeah.
Very cluttered, totally different color temperature, very warm comparatively. I definitely like the one that he has on his Instagram here more.
Yeah.
It's much more pleasing to the eye.
It really shows, like, especially in those washes, how things change so much year by year, where there's a scene that, and actually that scene when he photographed that looks like the heart, that's just around the corner from the photo I mentioned earlier that I had taken of like the mud ripples with the yellow maple leaves and stuff. It's just these bends in the wash is where you usually have pretty good light and some good conditions all day long. But yeah, just seeing those two photos really shows you how things can change so much down there. I mean, also since there's like, crazy flood waters that tear through the place and literally move things around. But it shows the value of returning to a location and really getting to know the place and realizing when the conditions really are very special in a world where everything is, out in nature, everything is so chaotic all around you, but just to zero in on a particular subject saying, ooh, this area looks really good this year. It gives that sense of direction. So I think that's one of the values, certainly in returning to locations.
He has a post on his blog as well. I think it's the only post, but it's Zion 2024 challenges. And in the post, he has a screenshot of his Lightroom catalog from the photographs that he had exposed there, the 18 photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking through these, there's quite a few in here that are just really solid pieces. And
yeah,
I just like reading through what he writes about it and the challenges that he gave himself. Like he says here, fast forward to last week, I gave myself some challenges. No doubles unless it's for technical reason. Trust your metering. Slow everything down. Focus on quality versus quantity. And single exposures for all subjects, excluding dramatic changes in light. I think those challenges are pretty good ones to put to yourself. Like,
yeah,
just to push yourself, especially if you're going to a location that you've been frequently enough. But yeah,
and he had mentioned when I was talking to him this year how he was just doing one exposure for each subject for the most part, and that shows a lot of restraint. It also saves money.
Yeah,
so there's that.
Exactly.
But it shows a lot of restraint because there's so many times when, I'll set up a scene, I'll take the exposure. I'm like, hell, that's great. I nailed it. And then you wait about, 30 seconds. You're like, did I nail that? I'm not, you start questioning the exposure. You start questioning, was this the right moment? Was there some wind motion? Did I kick the tripod leg? All these various things. And then ultimately you end up taking another exposure and you look at them on a light table like these are absolutely the same. There's no difference between them. And having just one photo of a scene, it's also, I don't know, there's something about it that's even more satisfying. Just knowing that you made all the decisions right. And maybe place a little more value in that image because, you don't have like 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. 3 or 4 of them that you're constantly going back and forth on. Which one's slightly better, slightly sharper?
Yep.
Exactly.
I definitely had that experience when I was going through my work from Zion. I had 2 variations of the same. I'm looking at, okay, which is there one where there's a little bit of leaf movement on it? Yes. No,
yeah.
I don't know,
light is slightly different. The composition changed ever so slightly because of the wind. Yeah. It's fun times.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, he's a really, really cool guy. I also got to meet his wife this year because she was there for a few days. And also the fall color was very, very late this year. So it was mostly green when we were there, which I think also added to the challenge a little bit in terms of when we were there to try to find subjects and everything like that. But yeah, he produced some really, really great work. So everyone should go check it out and give him a follow.
Cool.
I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.